Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars Rewatch video. This one's going to be for Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. So we're into the original trilogy and we'll be covering, of course, Empire Strikes Back later on in the week. But yeah, it was really interesting, having just done the prequels, going into the originals here. Haven't watched 4 especially in a while. Just how fun of a movie it is. It's definitely a simpler movie than I think any of the prequels. I think it's pretty fair to say there's a bit more going on in the prequels because of sort of that political maneuvering, because it takes a little bit more to explain the situation that is the Clone Wars than it does to explain the pretty to the point Rebels versus Empire. But I don't think I can overly criticize the originals for being, kind of simplistic in a way, because there's a reason Star Wars took off, and it's because they started on such sort of solid ground with just, classic storytelling, archetypical characters and stuff like that you can get behind and just get you into what this universe is about, because this was the first movie, of course. And I think what impresses me the most about it is just that, obviously, 1977 when this first came out, it really holds up how well it looks. Of course, I'm going off this. I think it's just a special edition. This is like the early 2000s DVD. There is a second disc on this one that does have the original theatrical version of it. I usually just watch the normal one because I'm not one of these people who particularly cares about George Lucas switched something around or anything like that. Because, to me, it doesn't really matter to me that if Han or Greedo shoots first in that sequence. I really don't think it matters that much. The same thing happens regardless. Han ends up killing Greedo. He still says sorry about the mess and flicks the coin over. It still comes across cool regardless of the order that they do things in. So yeah, that was, I think, just the best thing about this, is that you almost worry you're watching this movie that's over 40 years old. It's just gonna really not look as good as, say, Episode 3 especially. This is the biggest shift in Star Wars basically. But no, it stands out super well. That Episode 3 has probably the best space battle in the prequels in terms of Star Wars. And then this movie, I think, for me, has probably the overall best space battles in Star Wars, with the trench run at the end, the Death Star trench run with the X-Wings at the end is such a classic scene. I think they haven't come particularly close to, I think, getting a kind of space sequence that's been as good as that. I think Episode 2, the Jango and Obi-Wan sequence in the asteroids with the depth charge type thing, is a pretty cool kind of one-on-one fighter pilot sequence. Like I said, opening of Revenge of the Sith is pretty good. And then we do have, some solid stuff in 5, 6 and so on. But I think nothing quite comes as close to being as strong as the trench run, because the tactics of it, this is the center point of this movie, whereas in another Star Wars movie it can oftentimes be the ground battle on Endor in Episode 6 or something like that. And the space battle is important, but it's kind of secondary to the lightsaber duel going on, and that's a lot of the times in Star Wars that it comes down to a lightsaber fight and some other thing happening, and maybe the space battle ends up being kind of bottom of the pile, like Episode 1, even though the Anakin sequence is fine with the Naboo starfighters, but it doesn't stand up really against them going up and down the levels of the palace and then the lightsaber fight. Here it gets to be the centerpiece of everything, and that's the build of this movie. It's the power of the Death Star. Will it come into range here and take them all out on Yavin? Or will they be able to use the plans that they get at the start of the movie and win the day? And it's a sort of desperate plan in that they ultimately have to sacrifice a lot of ships to kind of escort the lead member of each group down the trench run. And to get that shot, it's this last-ditch desperation thing, but it works because it's simple, because they're not overloading you with different types of ships. It's just TIE fighters and X-Wing, and then Darth Vader, of course, has his own ship. And it just, to me, was amazing to watch again, having not seen it in a while. Just the targeting computer is such a cool kind of thing, and then Obi-Wan talking to him, telling him not to use it. I think it's Red Leader initially kind of misses the shot, but he comes like this close, and then Luke on his own has to do it. Han comes in right at the end. It all is just like, yeah, these are great moments and stuff like that. So I suppose let's talk about the lightsaber fight, because I talked about how, this movie, it's all about the big space fights. That one, and then like Luke and Han on the kind of the cannons as well, is a pretty cool sequence. But the lightsaber fight here definitely sort of... This is probably the one point in the movie that really shows you how old it is, that the technology that they needed to do to get the lightsaber effects across meant that they couldn't do much in action with them. It's okay. It's not as, like, I think bad as I was, like, remembering it in my head, but it's still not great. That you go to, like, Anakin Obi-Wan 1 in episode 3, which is like the best lightsaber fight in the series, kind of, pretty much, to like Vader Obi-Wan 2, and it's it's slow, and they clearly can't hit each other with the sticks too hard and stuff like that, because of course how fragile they were to get across to do the lightsaber effect and so on. So it was just a kind of technology thing that holds it back. It still has aspects of the lightsaber fighting in terms of the quick up down and stuff like that, getting that across in it, but they improved the choreography in the originals as we go into 5 and 6, of course. But I think the prequels is definitely where the lightsaber fighting is best. I don't know what they're doing in the sequels, but the lightsaber fighting is not very good, and we'll get to that. And that's where I'm kind of very interested to go back to 5 and 6 to see how those bigger duels stack up against the ones that we see in 7 and 8. But what it does have going for it, even though the choreography isn't great, is sort of the intensity of the scene, of just the freeing Leia, the escape through the corridors with all the stormtroopers. It's really desperation stuff, because there's only like a handful of characters here trying to get out of an entire space station filled with enemies, as Obi-Wan is there fighting lightsaber to lightsaber against Vader. And they build up, and he sees like, oh, this is my chance to let them get away, and he accepts it. And because you now, like, watching it in numerical order, you have the context of Obi-Wan is trained from Yoda, who trained from Qui-Gon to learn how to become a Force Ghost, become one with the Force. The scene has that extra bit of meaning in terms of him just having the confidence to accept it and what happened, and you gaining that bit of extra understanding that, yeah, Vader didn't actually cut through him. He became one with the Force, like, right at that moment, and that's why you don't really see any actual lightsaber go really through anything. So it seems like this shocking moment, but then it's like, yeah, he just disappeared. There's no body there. He becomes one with the Force, and that's why he's able to speak to Luke later on. And it's a shocking moment for Luke, because you do see sort of Luke in terms of his character development in this movie sort of experience all those losses of first his aunt and uncle being killed at the start, to project him into this story, and then his new mentor Obi-Wan also going down here. It's a tough situation for Luke, in that, like, he ends this movie not really having a mentor, just Obi-Wan in the Force whenever he contacts him. So that's an interesting one for Luke, in that, like, he, in terms of his training, like, he really hasn't used the lightsaber all that much. He knows how to use it. He's done a few drills on the Millennium Falcon, but in terms of lightsaber to lightsaber combat, he hasn't done any of it. He doesn't have anyone to train him, and so this is another kind of key point, I think, across the trilogies, is the main character of each trilogy and how they do their training. Because, of course, Anakin, Luke, Rey are all Force users. They all have to develop their skills, because they obviously start from pretty much nothing. They all start from very similar points, found on a desert planet, begin their training kind of in the middle of things. And It took, we see Anakin, like, he doesn't know how to fight at all in 8, but by 10 years later, he's a pretty good fighter. Then you go to episode 3, he's one of the best. Luke, again, doesn't really have much combat training here at all, just kind of knows how to handle himself. We go into episode 5, he's a bit more experienced being around the rebellion, but doesn't know how to use the lightsaber particularly well. And then finally it takes episode 6 for him getting to that point, versus where we are with Rey, where it's pretty fair to say that they don't do Rey's development in terms of her powers particularly well. It's just they write her to do things when they need her to do things, and that's really it. And you can see where the frustration comes in that, like, you would have done so much more service to the character if you had just had her done the same type of training than an Anakin or a Luke has done. So that's why it feels weird that Anakin, the chosen one, needed like 10 plus years of training to get to this level, versus Rey, who, like, we don't know the full situation on, but she gets her skills almost immediately. And I think that's what they do a good middle ground here with Luke, he's taken out by the sand people fairly early on in this movie. Like, he's not made out to be a fighter at all. He has skills in terms of fixing things, the sort of latent pilot skills that most of our sort of main Force user characters have because of the enhanced reflexes, because of the sort of unknowing connection to the Force that they have, and so on. But combat-wise, not really. But you give him a blaster and he gradually gets going on it, and that's where you see like Han, of course, is like the best shot of the group here, but Leia is surprisingly good as well. And I think that's I almost forgot just like how watching it after the prequels, you really see it, sort of how like Padme Leia is, and that Padme was always willing to, like, if a fight happened, she'd grab a blaster and be pretty impressive in it and fierce in the fight. And Leia is kind of much the same. Luke comes in, rescues her, and she just kind of takes over. She's in command because she's more experienced. She grabs a blaster and just starts taking people out. It's really impressive, I think, overall. The other thing with this movie was it was interesting to see a lot more focus on our R2 and C-3PO. Obviously, right at the start of the movie, it is a slow sort of opening as like you focus on them, on the ship, going down to the planet, and you're not introduced to Luke until like the whole Jawa sequence sort of like comes to an end and they're kind of sold to them and stuff like that. So it's one of those things where, like, because they focused on them enough here, that's why you want them in episode 9 to really come back to R2 and C-3PO and do something a little bit more with them, and not just have it feel like you've forgotten about the characters, which has sort of felt like the way in the sequels so far. Like, R2 and C-3PO really haven't had a lot to do overall, so that's why it seems like they're building up that C-3PO is going to be doing something pretty important in 9. And you have to pay off just him being such an important character, of like, those two are the constants across the movies, basically. You need to do something big with them just as much as anything else. I suppose, Darth Vader, I suppose, is one of those ones where, like, he obviously is like one of the most legendary villains out there. It is interesting that, like, I do ultimately feel that in this movie in particular, like, they I think get the right characterization of Vader down in like episode 5 and 6 in terms of the right level of threatening and stuff like that. And you could tell it maybe wasn't all there, but just the visuals of him arriving in, him being like the first one to show us the Force used in those ways, the Force chokes and stuff like that. It is pretty impressive. And then having sort of Tarkin be, your kind of, Emperor before the Emperor is kind of properly introduced is he actually plays a good role here in terms of his cruelty, in terms of, like, he orders the destruction of Alderaan. We see a planet be destroyed, and obviously episode 7 did its best to really sort of take out the impact of the kind of planet destruction thing by just having, it took out a whole system of planets, Starkiller Base, and it's just a bit like, really episode 7, you just had to do that, but like times 7. Um, but yeah, it's one of those movies where like watching it again, like I said at the start, there there isn't, I think, actually too much to discuss. It's just that, like, visually, world building wise, this presents the sort of blueprints for Star Wars that they go off from here. And it is interesting to see stuff like, you know, starting off on Tatooine, the introduction of like the Jawas, and it's clear because they do focus on them for a little bit what they're about. Even though no one actually just flat out explains what the Jawas do, just through the scenes, it's pretty clear. They grab droids because they sell sort of technology to people. They sort of scrap it. That's how they make their money, by sort of traveling around the sort of more isolated areas of Tatooine and selling it to like moisture farmers and so on. And you know, explaining that 3PO is like a protocol droid. He does translation and stuff like that, and so on. It makes it clear of, like, you know, just world building through, you know, scenes that without even explaining it, it becomes clear what it is. And it's sort of like the prequels, I think, do a more sort of directed job in terms of, I think, just overall explaining to you more stuff about like the species plus the planet and just the overall kind of idea system. This just does a good job at just in general getting you into Star Wars. But then the sequel trilogy, I think, definitely does have the problem of not really doing much of that world building at all, in that most of the new species we're introduced to do not stand out at all. Most of the planets we go to don't stand out because we're just there for the plot. The planet itself and its like ecosystem and stuff like that doesn't matter. Like we don't know the native species of this planet or that planet or anything like that, or any sense of a history like Episode 1 does so well with Naboo, like they do well here with Tatooine. Of like Luke obviously lives sort of isolated out on the farm, but then they go to like the spaceport where it's obviously where Tatooine is more connected to the rest of the planets, and it's like, you know, you need to be careful here because especially around areas like this, it's a wretched hive of scum and villainy, and that a planet like this in these areas, it is pretty bad. You need to be cautious, and that's why you set up that idea of like Luke sort of being out of his depth in a way when he goes into the cantina and ends up sort of, you know, staring around the place, becoming a bit of an easy target, and that's where Obi-Wan has to really kind of step in to sort of protect him. And that's a big moment because, like, I think in context you look at that and be like, wow, that is a big moment for Obi-Wan. Like, how many years has he, you know, stayed hidden as a Jedi, and now here, finally starting the journey with Luke, he's like, yes, I have to do this. Sort of out himself as a Jedi, using his lightsaber in public, knowing that it's sort of now or never for this. That becomes a cool moment just because of that threat of Order 66. Like, having just played Jedi Fallen Order like a few days ago, like that threat is huge. So, you know, the fact that Obi-Wan is willing to do what he does here is very, very impressive. Yeah, the introduction of the Falcon, you know, Han as a character, like I said, I don't put a lot of stock on the whole him shooting Greedo and who shoots first as being like a character trait of him, because ultimately across the movies, I never particularly associate Han as being like, oh yeah, he's sort of that, he's got that sort of cruel edge to him where he'll just, you know, be a bit dishonorable and just shoot him. The idea, I think, is just that he is meant to be the sort of the smuggler with the heart of gold. I think that's why I actually like Solo as a movie. Even though I don't think it's the best Star Wars movie, I like that they sort of got that idea across, that Han as a character is not, he can't ever bring himself to truly be that, you know, scum and villainy type thing. He can't go that far because he's a fundamentally good character. And so I actually appreciate the sort of intent behind getting the detail of the character across in a scene like the Greedo Han sequence of like, he doesn't shoot first, but you know, it shows his skill that he like dodges Greedo's shot, he predicts it and gets Greedo that way, and you know, still has the cool kind of moment of like, you know, he's not gonna immediately run into a place and like shoot someone from behind or something like that, but he, when he needs to get going, he shows himself to be that sort of, you know, have that like roguish charm and stuff like that. So I do like that for sure. Well, one thing that did stood out to me actually watching it here again is that like within like the first few minutes of the movie, like on the Tantive V4, like they are mentioning a bunch of kind of political terms like the Imperial Senate. I actually forgot how like they actually mention that is a thing, and it's a plot point in this movie that the Imperial Senate is disbanded at a certain point here. And this is the Emperor like 100% fully in power, that he still has even at the end of episode 3, there is still this sort of organization type stuff that he has to do to just fully gain all of the power for himself, and he's only just kind of done it here by being able to get rid of the whole Imperial Senate. So it is just the Emperor, and like he doesn't answer to anyone in any way because of that. So it's just some little things that you kind of keep your eye on in this, and that like the reason Leia's here and so on, and like she's an ambassador and she goes to the Imperial Senate, so she is a sort of political, has political skills, is pretty interesting. But yeah, that's pretty much my thoughts on Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope. Apologies about the lighting in this video. It was either do it now or who knows when the video will get done. So apologies about that. I'll work on being able to record at a better time for the next one. But yeah, that's Episode 4. Next up, Empire Strikes Back. That's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.